Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Dead on arrival. That's what Senator Rand Paul called the impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump. And most Republicans went on record yesterday agreeing with him.
Senator Paul also called the trial a partisan vendetta against a man no longer in office. So what happens next? Caitlin Burke explains.
Republican senators sent a strong signal Tuesday as 45 out of 50 voted to declare the impeachment trial of former President Donald Trump unconstitutional.
In this vote, the ayes are 55, the nays are 45. The motion to table is agreed to. The point of order is not sustained. Majority Leader.
The trial goes on, but the vote, set in motion by Senator Rand Paul, makes it clear that Trump is almost certainly headed towards a second acquittal.
This impeachment is nothing more than a partisan exercise designed to further divide the country. Democrats claim to want to unify the country, but impeaching a former president, a private citizen, is the antithesis of unity.
Senator Paul blasted the trial and called on his colleagues to put an end to it and instead get to work for America.
Instead of doing the nation's work with their new majorities in the House, the Senate, and the executive branch, Democrats are wasting the nation's time on a partisan vendetta against a man no longer in office.
GOP lawmakers argued the trial is unconstitutional because Trump is no longer the president.
How can you put someone through a process where the automatic consequence of it is impossible? You can't remove Donald Trump from office. He's not in office.
Democrats insist the Constitution does not exempt a former president from impeachment.
The theory that the Senate can't try former officials would amount to a constitutional get-out-of-jail-free card for any president who commits an impeachable offense.
While only 5 Republicans voted in favor of moving forward with the trial, 17 would need to join Democrats in order to convict Trump. There may be another alternative, however. According to Axios, Republican Susan Collins of Maine and Democrat Tim Kaine of Virginia are trying to get their fellow senators to go along with a bipartisan resolution censuring Trump.
The impeachment trial will move forward on February 9th. Paul's motion has officially put senators on the record and made very clear that as of now, the votes to impeach the former president just aren't there. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
And because the votes aren't there, this makes this a show trial. I think the Senate will go forward with this, but we already know the result, and we already know that he'll be acquitted. In other news, states around the country are angry over shortages of vaccines for the coronavirus. So President Biden is taking action. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That's right, Gordon. The president says the United States will ramp up deliveries to hard-pressed states over the next 3 weeks. And he expects to provide enough doses to vaccinate 300 million Americans by the end of summer or early fall. Biden calls the push a, quote, wartime effort, adding that lives are at stake. The president also signed 4 executive actions Tuesday aimed at fighting racial discrimination, including redressing racially discriminatory federal housing policies and directing the Justice Department to stop the use of private prisons. Well, as COVID-19 continues to spread, the black community has seen record cases and fatalities. Many distrust the vaccine and refuse to take it. As Charlene Aaron reports, that's why one prominent pastor is using facts over fear to change hearts and minds.
In an effort to better inform the African-American community about the vaccine, Bishop T.D. Jakes brought in big-name experts for an online event called Conversations with America, Understanding the COVID-19 Vaccine. During the nearly hour-long discussion, Jakes asked questions such as whether these experts had any angst about the vaccine over the long term. Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, the lead scientist on the coronavirus research team, didn't hesitate.
Absolutely no angst at all. You know, one of the things that I think is largely forgotten throughout this is that the first phase 1 clinical trial actually started on March the 16th, which was almost 10 months ago. And so from those people, they've been followed since then, and there are no outcomes for long-term adverse outcomes. Long-term side effects are not something to be worried about.
Much of the concern among blacks dates back to the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, a 40-year government study involving hundreds of black men. The men, mostly poor sharecroppers suffering from syphilis, were monitored yet not treated by government health officials. Many died, went blind, or experienced other severe health problems. Dr. Anthony Fauci admitted the skepticism is understandable.
It's a shameful history that we have to just deal with. So whenever I talk to my African American friends and colleagues about getting vaccinated, you always have to show respect for their skepticism and then try to get them to understand why it is safe, it is effective, and it is good not only for your own health, but for your families and your community.
Jakes explained while hard-hit communities of color desperately need the vaccine, access and distribution may be a problem. He suggested using churches and other faith-based groups as a solution.
Is there any thought about getting medical professionals to work through faith-based entities within those local communities where they could go to churches, for instance, and have medical physicians there that could administer the vaccine? Because many of our communities are in food deserts and places like that where they can't get the vaccine.
You could do it by community centers, churches. You mentioned, Bishop, is very important. Faith-based organizations getting involved, but also mobile units to go out into those communities which are not readily accessible.
In the meantime, Jakes says while his conversation provides people with education and knowledge about the shot, he also wishes to offer hope to those affected by the pandemic. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Church is leading an important conversation. Thanks, Charlene. Well, today marks International Holocaust Remembrance Day in honor of the 6 million Jews who died at the hands of the Nazis in World War II. To remember the Holocaust, CBN News got an exclusive tour of Yad Vashem, Israel's Holocaust Memorial. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell brings us that story from Jerusalem.
Tourists have not visited Yad Vashem for nearly a year because of the COVID-19 pandemic, yet Shaya Ben Yehuda, managing director, opened the memorial to tell its story.
Yad Vashem's name is coming from the book of Isaiah, the message that each of those people who perished during the Holocaust should be remembered.
The memorial traces the story from before World War II through the horrors of the Holocaust.
My mother was born in Germany. She grew up before Hitler came to power, but she witnessed what happened in Germany when Hitler came to power. As years moved forward, reality got worse and worse for the Jews.
Ben Yehuda lost many of his family in the Holocaust.
We cry for what happened to humanity, what happened to those who were created by the image of Lord.
Mass murder took place on an industrial scale at the hands of the Nazis.
How they took the decision to destroy life. How they have decided that Jews are subhuman that have no right to exist.
6 million perished. Yet some stood with and saved Jews who are remembered at the Avenue of the Righteous among the nations.
Righteous among the nations are non-Jews who put their own life in risk in order to try and help Jews during the Holocaust. They were not bystanders, they didn't turn their back.
Yet Ben Yehuda says the lesson of the Holocaust is a lesson for today.
Wherever you see anti-Semitism or any other hatreds, please stand up.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Yad Vashem Memorial, Jerusalem.
Important lessons to never forget. Well, here in Washington, the newly Senate-confirmed Secretary of State gets to work today. Antony Blinken, a longtime Biden confidant, served as Deputy Secretary of State and Deputy National Security Advisor in the Obama administration. Blinken's confirmation came the same day the Biden administration announced it was restoring relations with the Palestinians and renewing aid to Palestinian refugees, reversing Trump policies. The administration cut off funding for the UN Relief and Works Agency, known as UNRWA. The agency is supposed to provide aid for Palestinian refugees, including operating refugee camps. Critics say those camps incite anti-Semitic propaganda in their schools with Palestinian textbooks and become breeding grounds for terror. Gordon, a stark change in policy with a change in administration.
Well, it is a change in policy, but I need to correct the Biden administration. The relationship with the Palestinian Authority was never cut off by the Trump administration. They had a Palestinian Affairs Office as part of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. And it was the Palestinians that refused to meet with any U.S. representative because Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel in accordance with a law passed by the U.S. Congress. So you can't reverse all of that, and we can't newspeak that into some kind of different history. It was the Palestinians who cut off the relationship. We also need to remember what they do with our tax dollars. They use that money to fund their Shaheed program, the people who are terrorists, who are rewarded financially for killing Jews. The more Israelis you kill, the stiffer the sentence you receive under Israeli law, the more money your family receives. And until that kind of payment stops, I don't see why you would ever use U.S. tax dollars to fund that kind of activity. If you want to claim UNRWA is some kind of relief organization, that's what their title is, what they're really funding is incitement. And they're funding textbooks, instructions that start very young in grammar school. The children are taught how bad the Jews are, how bad Israel is, and it's a continual incitement. The Palestinians have never missed an opportunity to come to peace with Israel. They always put unbelievable demands on the table. They have no intention of coming to peace. They also have no intention of a two-state solution. They could have had that for decades now. But their main goal is one state, a Palestinian state with Israel driven into the sea. And it was so refreshing to finally see a State Department and an administration that recognized that and said, no, we're no longer going to fund this nonsense. We're going to stop it. But here we have the same old thing coming back. But let me urge on the new administration, please adhere to long-standing U.S. policy. This goes back to decades. You have to recognize Israel's right to exist. You have to renounce terrorism, and you have to say UN Resolution 242 and 338 are appropriate. You have to recognize those, and when you do that, then we can resume normal relations. But the Palestinians have no intent of ever doing that. So why are we playing around, and why are we once again engaging in this decades-long dance that leads to nowhere? Here's another thing that's going to happen. For the first time in 15 years, the Palestinian Authority is going to hold elections. The last time they did it, President Bush was in office. There was a lot of hope. There would be new freedom, open elections. A lot of PR went into that. You know, isn't this great? The Palestinians are finally going to get to elect a democratic leadership. Who did they elect? Hamas. They elected a terrorist group. So here we are 15 years later, a lot of internal war as a result of that election, internal struggles within the Palestinian Authority, division between Gaza, West Bank. Here we are 15 years later, we're going to have another election. We'll see who they elect. My guess is they'll elect terrorists yet again.